everyone. Welcome to another episode of Off the Chain. NFT Fest is on this week in Melbourne, so I've been lucky enough to have a bunch of people traveling into town that I've been able to do this with face to face. And today I'm lucky to be joined by Dave Heavyside. Thanks for coming, mate.
Yeah, mate, pleasure to be here, and thanks to Melbourne for having us. We're down from the Gold Coast, so it was nice and frosty welcome when we got in on
Mate, I bet.
on Tuesday. But it's warming up now, so it's not too bad. But
It's all good. So we'll probably touch on that a little bit. Like obviously it's not live, so this will probably be distributed in a week or two. So we could talk about the festival a little bit and what that means for you. But man, I'd love to sort of kick things off just with a bit of a backstory as far back as you're comfy going, to give people a bit of context on yourself.
yeah, sure. I guess my personal journey to where I got to today is probably really shaped by a couple of things. My sporting career is probably the main thing that kind of led me here. So I was a cricket player for a long time. I played club level cricket, both here and in the UK for a little stint. And it was great. I played a fair bit of first grade and really sort of chased that sort of dream for a while. During that time, there was always you told it the backup plan. What happens if you don't make it? And I was always into drawing and creative arts as a kid. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do something in the space, design or architecture or something like that would be a nice backup. So I actually went to uni to study industrial design for a couple of years before the opportunity to play cricket overseas came along, and dropped out of uni to go chase that. And when I came back to Australia after a couple of years, instead of going back into industrial design, I actually switched it up and just did design and advertising at TAFE in Adelaide, and that was an amazing time. I was lucky to have some really good tutors there and some lecturers, and I really fell in love with graphic design. Cool. So I was also reading a magazine at the time. I was a cricketer, but I played pretty much every other sport. And me and my brothers, I had two younger brothers, we used to love going surfing. And so there's a little beach down in Adelaide called Knights, which is like a little bodyboarding spot. And we used to bodyboard a lot down there. And bodyboarding got me into the bodyboarding sort of scene. And I was a subscriber of a magazine at the time called Riptide. And just used to love getting the Riptides in the mail each month, and that was really cool. And so during my time studying graphic design, I really sort of took a lot of inspiration from the magazine designs. And then that led me to actually trying to sort of get some work experience at the publishing company. So that was Morrison Media, which was based up on the Gold Coast. And I sort of just kept pestering them and saying, "Oh, have you got any work experience? Going to come and give it a shot."
It's a way to go.
And yeah, they didn't have anything for a long time, and I was sort of like, "Oh, we don't really do work experience." But I'd sort of finished my degree, and then about sort of 6 months later, a year later, the creative director from Morrison Media gave me a call and said, "Look, we've got a spot opening up. Do you want to come and work for us?" And I was about 26 or 27 at that stage, and my sort of cricket career had sort of stalled a little bit. I was a bit unsure of what to do, and so I said, "Yeah, why not make the move?" So packed everything up in Adelaide, and then moved to the Gold Coast to start work at Morrison Media, and worked on Riptide, the magazine for real for the first time. And
that's amazing. I love
it. It was unreal. So I got thrown in the deep end. I remember there was just a situation where they needed the magazine for that issue finished really quickly. So they were basically like, "Look, here's half of the magazine. It's already done. You got to finish the other half in 2 weeks." And I was like, first job out. Yeah, so...
Well, shows persistence pays, man. If you back yourself, you keep going, it's awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, that was great. And so then I started sort of life in the publishing industry and learned a hell of a lot in, 5 or 6 years that I was at Morrison Media, and worked on a whole bunch of titles, all the way from Riptide, which is the bodyboarding mag. I worked across surfing and motocross, snowboarding, even a little bit for the skateboard mag that was there at the time. So I really got to see how that world of action sports worked, and sports marketing, working with brands, advertisers, understanding the relationship between, you know, the editorial side of things and the advertising side of things, and really sort of getting to understand that world. And that absolutely fascinated me. You know, there's always a big push-pull from a creative perspective around, you know, what advertisers want and then what you want to do as a creative, and you know,
pay the bills.
You got to pay the bills, and so like that was just a great education around how.
What year did that end up?
So that was 2009.
And you finished up?
No, so I started in 2009. So so I started in 2009, and then in 2013 I actually got the opportunity that Peter Morrison was selling Morrison Media. So they had Frankie magazine, which was like a title there that was going absolutely gangbusters for them, and it was the right time for him to sell the company. And but part of that sale, like they were sort of like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to keep working for the company? And you know, they were looking at how they had the titles distributed, and they said, look, one of the opportunities you might have is to actually purchase Riptide as a title.
Wow.
And that was, you know, Riptide had been around for 20 plus years at that point. It was started in 1989. It had published almost 200 issues, and I think at the stage in 2013 when I got called into the office to say, look, what do you want to do? We were up to issue 196, and I'd been there since issue 173, I think. So there was a lot of energy and a lot of heart and soul, and I'd worked with some incredible editors, and like I just loved that magazine. And 2013 was not the right time to buy a print media company.
I was waiting to ask the question.
So, but you know, my heart overruled my head, and I said, look, you know, I was 30 at that stage, and I was like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And I thought, you know, let's just jump in the deep end of entrepreneurship. And so I bought the title off of Morrison Media in 2013, and boy, that was another whole learning curve. So, yeah. So
how did you, like, obviously, I mean, now, 9 years later, we said, and even John Westenberg yesterday at first day of MSC Fest was talking about, you know, publishers not having to compete with themselves, but they need to compete with other forms of media, specifically audio, because of the declining in feminine media that it is from a leading perspective. Did you notice that from even back then?
Oh yeah, and it was really interesting because I remember I've always been into gaming. So a little bit of a side story to that is like me and my brothers, I still remember the day that we got a Nintendo for Christmas from our parents.
What a day.
Right, and it was just running around the house, and we were just going bananas. I think we had GoldenEye and Super Mario, and so
Double dribble.
yeah. But even before then, I was lucky. My grandpa was into computers, so he had an old Commodore 64, and so we'd always been into gaming and technology, and that had always played like a little role through my life because we were super competitive as kids. So when we couldn't play outside, we'd play inside on the computer. Right, and so, and everyone knows what that was like, sort of, if you had that gaming experience as a kid, and so I was always interested in technology. And so when I first joined Morrison Media, there was the start of kind of the digital thing. It was, you know, coming into play where you would sort of, like, MySpace actually was still the big thing when I first started there. Like back in 2008, 2009, there was still MySpace.
Yep, that makes sense. Yep.
And then slowly came Facebook, and then came Instagram. And we were like, you know, it was a credit to the team because we put forward to them that we should start building digital audiences for our stuff because it was visual, right? So Instagram became like huge for us. It was great. Like we built a massive audience on Instagram, a massive audience on Facebook. And it was just putting all of our videos and images up online for people to see them. And that was amazing because we suddenly had like this global audience. You know, we had already had a global audience because of our print publication, but we could reach so many more people in so many corners of the world. And for a while it worked. Like it was great until all the brands cottoned on that they could do the same thing. Right?
So were you putting media spend behind it, or was it mostly organic?
No, we didn't do any media spend. It was all completely organic. We never spent.
I mean, back then it was spreading like wildfire just with organic, right?
Yep.
Especially that kind, to your point, that kind of content would have been perfect. People have been giving it up.
Yeah, you know, for the first time, the pictures in the magazine came to life, and you could see, you know, put a spread in the mag, do a feature on someone, and then say, hey, check out our Instagram for the videos, and people just loved it. They ate it up. So
Vice versa too, right? Pushing people back to
the mag. So for a little while, for a couple of years, there was like a really good symbiotic relationship between digital and print media, and you know, for a long time, it worked okay. And then gradually, as the tools got better, and you know, the platforms started to really kind of drive from an advertising perspective and launch their advertising platforms and do all of that, the brands all of a sudden had a way to reach the consumer directly, and they could bypass third-party media.
Got it.
So it basically just killed the print industry, right? And so
no one wanted to spend, say, a round of money or any money there because they'd be those channels for that he gets straight forward.
Exactly right. So I mean, back in the day, you know, you might have a double page spread for an advertiser, you know, like a double page ad. That would go for, you know, $3 or $4 grand per spread per issue, and there would, you know, that was what basically
like your
paid.
publication specifically, that obviously
I mean, the other like
on the audience sizes and the niche and
just talking in the sort of the sport action sports industry, that was kind of the going rate, right? You know, and some of the bigger publications, and depending on where you were in the magazine, if it was like inside front,
of course,
it's like premium 10 grand, inside back, same thing. So there were, but average was about that. But then, like, because it was so cheap, brands could take that $3 or $4 grand, $5 grand, and what they could do with that in social. Wow. So it just chewed everything from a print. Like, there was like, you know, it was really difficult. But at the same time, so like we witnessed that sort of firsthand coming through, and that revolution of media shift, as you sort of said earlier with referencing that other guy. But yeah, what a time to see the impact of digital media have on such a traditional business, and you know, newspapers included, and now you're seeing everything behind a paywall and all of that sort of stuff. But they still haven't figured it out, right?
For sure.
So, you know, Web3 kind of, I think that there is some stuff that will change all of that, but we can probably get into that a bit later.
No, totally. So, no, that's really interesting. That's why as soon as you started talking about the publishing trade, I wanted to get into that, because obviously, you know, things evolve. You know, TV ads aren't as effective as they used to be, but it's always, you know, the ratio around, and you sit the man and the price piece, they all work in some capacity. It's just what's worth the money and what's good value. So that's really interesting, mate. So please continue on from there. So, you know, as you sort of progressed through that stage in your career, you know, obviously we've still got a few years from a gap to Sefri until we get to Stadius and just your web creators and all the rest of it. But it sounds like, you know, from a creative perspective, I mean, I didn't say at the level of digital sport perspective. I played basketball my whole life, grew up in the music industry and mud tech, so very similar interests. So the second I knew what NFT were, I just didn't think I needed to do anything else other than work out how my career is, and you know, how I could enter the NFT and Web3 space. So tell us a little bit about, I guess, the conduit to now, just sort of how you sort of did it to that.
Yeah, so 2015 or 2016 was really like, you know, it was really difficult for print publications at the time, and the surfing industry on a whole kind of collapsed in on itself as well.
Interesting.
So it was the same, it was really like sort of two big things: digital media eating it up all of the spend from the advertisers, but then the advertisers themselves, like you remember back in the day, there was Quicksilver and Rip Curl and Billabong, and everyone, that was like everyone sort of in that demographic wore that clothing, like huge surf like stores. They were the brands, right? And gradually that's changed to like back to street culture and to like other smaller brands, and you know, so there was no longer the big behemoths backing all of that kind of industry. And so the surf industry itself went through a huge shift where, you know, the WSL got bought by a private company, and just a whole bunch of stuff happened. And it basically just meant that at that time, Riptide itself was unsustainable from a business perspective. So unfortunately, I had to shutter that business and basically put it into hibernation for a while. And luckily enough, I had two guys come along sort of earlier or a couple of years ago and want to take that business off my hands, and so I sold that, which was it was the end of an era for me because it was such a passion project. But about 2015, I was just doing what I needed to do to get bills paid. So I went back to doing like freelance work, contract work. There was a web design company downstairs from the Morrison Media offices. So I went and did some web design work for them. Cool. And sort of it was about 2016. I was in the offices down there, and on the computer next to me was just another hot desk guy. And he had his own company, but I remember sitting next to him about that time, and he goes, "Oh, have you heard about this Bitcoin thing?"
Yeah, wow.
And I was like, I sort of was aware of the white paper, and you know it. So when someone says it, it's not like a real jarring thing, right? But then he spent the time over the next sort of like couple of days explaining it and saying, I was like, all right, fine, like let's just do this. He helped me set up like a little wallet, and he like sent me some Bitcoin. And so, but like over that period of working down there and doing that freelance stuff, I kind of just like went down the rabbit hole at that point. So I think like I bought my first NFT. I can't remember what it was, 2017 or 2018, maybe even a bit later. But I remember the first time that I got exposed to the NFT side of things was Zed-Run, the horse racing game.
Yep.
And I was just fascinated that you could like buy digital racehorses. Yeah. I was like, this is cool. And there wasn't the NFT terminology around at that point. It was still before like PFPs and stuff were a thing. So, but I remember buying a couple of these horses. I'm like, that's cool. Like my uncle had a couple of racehorses and stuff. So I had the digital version, and he could play with the real thing, but there's mine. So I created a little stable and stuff. Yeah. And I just kind of sat on that. And the funny thing is like, I kind of was aware of the space, but I didn't go like deep into it. So I was doing freelance work. I still was kind of running the digital side of the magazine. And then I found myself just bouncing around between sort of different creative projects, consulting bits and pieces. And then about 2017, 2018, probably leading into 2019, I was doing some consulting work for an agency on the Gold Coast called Make, which was an introduction to through a friend of mine, and to Damien and Rick. And Make was a branding creative agency, but basically specialised in sports sponsorship activation. And that was really cool. So they worked with brands in the alcohol and gambling space primarily to activate their sponsorships at events. Yep. And so I started out just helping Damo with some signage. So, Forex had put on an event at Suncorp Stadium, and they'd need some signage for the bar and some big logos. Design those up. Yeah. And so it fitted really well in with all of my print experience. I basically just took all my knowledge of print setup over to them and said, yeah, look, I can do all your print stuff. And so that was great. We did that for them for about a year, and then they started to grow and get bigger jobs, and they were getting things like the Formula One and the Melbourne Cup, and sort of starting to grow as an agency. And I came on as creative director for them in about 2019. Yep. So sort of left the other world behind a bit, and stepped really heavily into the branding side of things, and that was my introduction into sporting sponsorships and porridge rights and activations and fan engagement and branding. And so for that 2019 through 2020, 2021, it was a really good learning experience of how brands worked in the space from a different perspective, still in sports and entertainment. That's right. So there was a lot that I carried over from my publishing days, but just at another level again, multi-million-dollar sports sponsorships.
For sure, when you're talking about the events of that size.
Yeah,
imagine.
And just to see how the brand teams work, the pace at which some of these events were pulled together, all the moving parts in the industry, and then again, I took a real interest into the business side of things, because it was, it's just something I do. I get down in the nitty-gritty, and I want to know how things work. And so I started to really understand the relationship that data played in measuring ROI and, the lack of transparency and some of that, and the lack of reporting, and it was crazy,
Get
right?
creative with those reports sometimes, for sure.
Yeah, and it was sort of then, and it was just the convergence of two worlds very, very slowly, right? So I'd always had this kind of NFT thing, the horses were sitting there, and so I was always kind of checking what was going on, and then a mate of mine, I can't remember how it happened, but it was just after Bored Apes had minted, and I'd sort of seen that come and go and missed that boat, and then I was like, I don't know, there's something going on here, and it was the start of that crazy market cycle.
Yep.
And he said, there's a project minting called On-Chain Monkey, you might want to take a look at it. And that was my first sort of re-entry back into the world of NFTs and in terms of the profile pic stuff. And so I sort of picked up a couple of On-Chain Monkeys. I looked at the team, really liked the team. And then that was really when I just went and looked hard at the technology again, wanting to unpack everything and get in the nuts and bolts. And probably similar to yourself, where you just, all of a sudden there was a light bulb moment and you're like, wait a second, this is transformational, just transformational technology, ownership of digital assets, provable and immutable forever, right? And then it was wow, everything that was happening in the brand space at the time was there's going to be it's going to change everything. Yeah. And so I said to Rick and Damo, I said, look, I know this is going to sound weird, but we have to look at this Web3 NFT stuff. Yeah. And I think there's a play here, because there's going to be brands that come into the space that want to do things with it. 100%. And as an agency, we've got a really great opportunity to, try and put forward some really creative solutions.
Especially in the sports space, for sure.
So that's kind of how Stadius all started. So, it sort of brings us up to today.
On Stadius.
Yeah, so Stadius is really the digital extension of what we were doing at the agency, right? How do you... it started out actually back in probably early 2019, because we were always looking for a digital solution to help us measure better ROI for the activations. So the things that we would measure were things like footfall and eyeballs and the amount of conversations you had about the brand, and they were your general things. And brands would spend 6 figures on putting up a container bar outside a major event for 3 days, and then at the end of it they'd be like, how'd it go? And you'd be like, we sold that many beers and this many people walked past, and they were like, cool. And yeah. So we'd sort of been trying to find a better way to give them better data back for a long time, using traditional sort of tools. But what we sort of found was that through NFTs and the data that you could attach through a token, you're like, wait a minute, we can build really deep data around, if we attach a beer to a token, for example, we can give that beer to someone, and then we can see how it moves through an ecosystem, because we can track the whole thing. So that was really what set kind of Stadius on its path around that fan engagement route, right? So, and it was still really early thinking. It was pretty much, well, we know the technology can do this. We know that there's massive gaps and holes in the entire chain, but let's just start there. Let's just see what it looks like to basically take the assets that the brands have, whether that's merchandise, beers, whatever they have at their disposal to engage fans at the time. Start to look at how the tokenization of that, could give them better data on their activations, but then also provide, follow-up engagement opportunities, what you could do from, a user journey, a user experience on a whole, how you could create multi touch point user experiences that kept reinforcing the brand along the way. And yeah, it's been probably 18 months of really trying to understand both how brands are entering the space, and then also what the technology can do. And how fast the tech moves. There's new standards every day. There's new things coming out all the time. So it's just sort of a matter of trying to stay ahead of that, and really get down to what's going to work for the brands and why they will want to shift into Web3, and then coming up with a really, a great solution that says, yes, we'll take the risk and we'll jump into the space. Because I think, as we've sort of seen over the last, probably 3 to 6 months, there's just still a real hesitancy for, not all brands, but most brands to say, look, we're going to stand back and
through a
we
lack
don't want to touch it.
lack of education as well, right? I think that, like, definitely there's way too many headline readers in any, in any scenario, in any issue, in any movement. People always, for whatever reason, whether it's laziness or fear of the unknown or whatever, rather just read headlines and form an opinion from that, or through what someone else has told them, instead of actually taking a couple of hours to go and get educated themselves. So I see that happening a lot, for sure. But I wanted to ask you, because a lot of, I guess the way we frame this show is the different stories, and I think that that story around your journey is really going to be useful to a lot of people, because what I'm trying to light on is there are many different relatable talents and career paths, etc., that can lead people into this space. So having that brand background, and even like I have always associated sport with entrepreneurship a lot. Obviously, it doesn't fit every single person, but I think, especially if you're successful in sport, there's something in with DNA that also gives you a chance of being a pretty decent entrepreneur, I believe. But whether it's like the resilience piece or the structure or the commitment or whatever it might be, which is always really, really interesting to me. So I think that you already answered a lot of what I was going to ask in terms of how people might find their way into the space. But I think that did you want to maybe do some pointers on how people might be able to just try or get their footing, regardless of whether they're a creative director or a founder in the space, or from a marketing perspective, because that's probably the easiest jump, so to speak.
I think just going back to the sporting and the entrepreneur thing, I think a lot of it is down to competitiveness.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So like I put that pretty much really high on the list. If I'm
we've got to switch in our brain.
Yeah, right. It's like you there's always that little bit of like competitive spirit that just always comes out where you're like, got to win, right?
100%.
So sometimes you can take it too far, but I think that's for me always a massive driver. I'm just super competitive. But I think like, from my perspective, it's a lot of kind of ignoring the noise, right? And ignoring the headlines. You just spoke about them, and there's just the media does what the media does. It's all about clicks and eyeballs, because the media landscape is completely broken in terms of how it works and how it's monetized, right? So this is really like, and it's another conversation topic in its own right about how we fix that, right? How do you stop the bad information and the misinformation and the shitty headlines that don't even tell a story? They're just there to like get someone to click on something.
Especially now that everyone is able to tell that story, it's an absolute,
it's
absolutely out of control now. That it's completely decentralized in terms of people can form voices, and we've seen people grow huge, especially on Twitter, huge accounts, and just literally retweet something that has not been fact checked at all, and people are like, "Oh, cool, that's gospel."
Yeah, so that's really important to understand. Like, if you're looking at the space, just
take your hours, take your time to get educated.
Take your time and find things that are in your lane that then add value to what you do or what you love. Because there will be times that you'll not get everything. The space is so big and so noisy, and it's there's so much going on that you won't understand everything off the bat. And even people who've been in crypto or in NFTs for 5, 6, 7 years, they still, even though they'll tell you they know everything, they don't know.
It's forever changing, so they can't.
Right. So
it changes every way.
Yeah. So just, I think the important thing for that is if you have something that you really love, find people in that industry that are either currently playing with the technology or doing some cool projects that might bring in some components of like tokens, or not tokens. Tokens is a bad word because it means so many different things in the space. But yeah, like whether it's NFTs or, there are really good people doing really good things across the board. You just have to dig a little bit to find them.
Sure.
So yeah, put in the hours, I think is the biggest thing, but make it relevant to you and your field, and then you'll come across everything else just by the by.
You probably absorb more information that way by having an interest or a passion in what sort of learning, right?
Yeah.
And yourself more of a chance to actually push through the noise and actually get to that information that brought it to you. It inspires you maybe to try something or connect with someone. I think, going to something like an NFT Fest, for example, like getting to meet people, like we obviously known each other, but getting to meet in person and just the serendipitous conversations, all the rest of it can certainly change the direction of what we've known for sure.
And I think that's the best part about anyone who's watching this now is that it's still really accessible to people.
Yep.
You can jump on Discord, you can jump into a Twitter, and you can find the people, and they're more than willing to talk to you.
100%.
And I've found that just incredible in the space. The amount of people that are willing to just, give some advice or just have a conversation, and it's great. And I think that that's one thing that Web3 as a whole, primarily, there's always bad actors in every corner, but I've found that everyone is willing to help. On them for the most part.
Completely agree with that for sure. Tell us what's the plans for next year for Stadius of Relay of Web3?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges that we knew we were going to come up against was scale, right? So it's one thing to be able to sort of dabble with the technology to do some specific things that are kind of in the market at the moment in Web3, but when you talk about what brands want to do and how they want to leverage sponsorships and the activations that they want to do at the scale they want to do them, particularly for us in sponsorship, which is and the brand activation piece, which is heavily skewed into IRL experiences at events. There's still a barrier between what you can do in the Web3 world in the digital space and what you can do in IRL. It's gradually, there's solutions gradually coming out, but there's still massive gaps. And part of the ones that we're focusing on is actually closing the loop on utility. So it's really about how do you take something that's digital and then turn it into something physical in real time where you want, when you want. Okay. And so that requires a whole lot of solutions to be built in the payment space. Sure. Because essentially it's a payments issue. So what we are doing currently is working with a number of companies in that payment space to really start to understand how we can use tokens as forms of payment, not just your Bitcoin and your Ethereum tokens, which are, that's fine, and whatever other ERC20 is out there, but actually saying, well, a beer's worth a beer, here's a token that's a beer, how can we use that to actually pay? And the current rails don't support any of this, right? Oh
yeah, that's right. It's infrastructural stuff for sure.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of infrastructure, and that payments infrastructure is crazy. It's a nuts world, right? So we just, for the people there that are listening, there's a really great panel that was on. We had the head of Visa, the head of Crypto.com, and they were talking about the complexities around compliance and payment rails and that space, and they're still working it out, right? So they don't have solutions.
You're battling two wars at once, right? The payments piece, and then the education around what the benefits are from actually using some sort of token.
Yeah, because the user experience is first and foremost.
Absolutely,
right? So what we really need to do, and for the brands to have a great user experience, and for the fans, or to come away and say that was really cool. I want to do that again.
It becomes sticky
and tell people about it. It has to be seamless. And so when you're talking about handing out 500 caps at an event, they have to be able to walk up to the merch stand and go, oh, I've got a token for a cap. Here it is, scanned, everything done. Whether that's merchant terminals, POS systems, back-end software infrastructure, the whole thing has to work seamlessly. And so that's kind of for us where we're sort of focusing our energy for the moment, and what will probably take up a lot of our time for next year. But the exciting part about that is that most of the companies are actually really willing to
That's
explore
exactly
it.
right. Yeah, so, I think so. It's an exciting time to get all that done, and building with the picks and shovels is really what I think a lot of the bear market is good for, because you get a second to breathe. And actually, although like I said, things are changing all the time, but regardless of that, it's changing at a much slower pace from a consumer expectation perspective, and just the blatant, manicness of what a bull run brings. We're not subject to that anymore. So you can take your time and be strategic with what you just spoken about, and be able to have proper conversations with people and actually test and learn and bake things and keep building. together, and you can also get more of their attention because they're not scattering, trying to also keep their competitors at bay, is trying to stay at the forefront. It facilitates a much more collaborative approach that we already naturally have in the space. So right, that's super exciting. We're here to get going to NFT Fest. So do you want to leave us with any tidbits or anything into the closure remarks, Vaporine, obviously?
No, look, just stay tuned to this guy's channel. Honestly, like, mate, what you're doing in the space is incredible, and I wish you all the best, and thanks for having me on. And yeah, let's go learn some more about the space.
Mate, thanks so much for joining. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think. Reach out to Dave and keep in touch with what he's up to. Cheers.
I really hope you've been enjoying Off the Chain so far. No matter how you're consuming this content, please leave your feedback either through the content platform itself or find me on Twitter at offthechainweb3. Cheers for your support. Thanks a lot.